My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sankaran, Guru Piran Neo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to cover the fourth principle of Mahan, which is the principle of light. And he also calls it the great causal sphere. Over the next, this satsang and the next few satsangs, I'll cover this notion of light. And why this light? We've heard this term called light, enlightenment, and illumination, and terms that we use. And what is this light essentially is talking about, right? So here, Swamiji then speaks about, light, but what does actually light really mean from a scientific perspective? So let's look at this, first from a scientific perspective, and then what Mahan says from his perspective. So what we see here is light is actually electromagnetic radiation. As you know that this whole universe is made out of radiation, energy and radiation. And light is actually an electromagnetic radiation, which is like an energy. And it can be recognized and detected by the human eye. So when the human eye cannot pick up that signals or the waves, we don't see that light. And so here we see that, it can be recognized and detected by the human eye. And there are various frequency. And where does it come from? All this come from? So, another way of characterizing this is it is a stream of photons. Photons is, energy, packets of energy. So it's got no mass. Most energy has got mass, but this has got no mass, and it's traveling in waves. And as you see this in waves, this is quite interesting because when sometimes people meditate, they tell me that, Guru, I'm in a state of really quiet. My mind is quiet. I see light. I see different colors. Okay, so and what that is happening is that the mind has become so quiet that the mind is picking up light waves. And how does the light waves come in, and I'll explain that. And most people think that is bliss. And quite interestingly, we see that, most meditators in the early stage, you'll see, I'm seeing different colors. And we also saw this in one of the poetries of a great saint, which I described in Tamil, where Ramalinga Swamigal says that Vanathil Mail Ada Kanden. That means in the space I see peacock dancing. And what he was essentially seeing is that this light, the color that was coming in frequency, as in a kind of a wavy. So he was seeing different colors, and these colors he was seeing somewhat like, peacocks. Peacocks have very beautiful color and they dance, right? So we see that there are great saints that, hundreds, 200 years ago, before electromagnetism was discovered, they were actually picking up different colors, and they thought that this is bliss and this is enlightenment. Right? So essentially what the mind has done is the mind has gone quiet, that it's picking up the basic light radiation. So, and this is what, this great saints, and the saint goes on to say that, mild koilachidi, which means this light radiation has gone into sound. And you'll see that interlink between sound and light later on when I come to this discussion. And you already seen it in earlier satsangs, right? So here we see that light from a scientific perspective is a radiation that is picked up by our eyes and our retina, and then it's transmitted electromagnetic field, and we can see all kinds of colors, right? We also spoke about this concept of, I, the principle one is I, and we spoke about how thought is a diffusion of the I. That means, and we also see that that is principle two. In principle three, we saw that the pulsation of I, the consciousness is actually energy. This is principle 3. And interestingly, there is a very nice link between this, that the formless form of I, which Swamiji speaks about, is fire or light. And you'll see how that energy transforms into light. It's not surprisingly, photon is an energy, and photon emanates radiation that is picked up by our eyes, and we see colors, forms of colors. So when a light hits an object and reflects on us, we see the colors and the shapes and the forms, right? So here there's a link between principle 3 and light, which is principle 4, which Swamiji makes this link, this vibration. So from this primordial, we have this energy, and the energy releases light. And there is a very nice parallel to our meditational meditational, the meditational approach and the vibrations that we cognize, and the kind of radiation that we get. Quite interestingly, if you see that, in many pictures, you'd see an aura of saintly people. You see an aura or saint, right? Like a kind of a circle. So what that is actually in many meditators, particularly great Mahans and saints, when the mind is very concentrated, the mind is focused, when the mind is absent of that material thoughts, you see that the energy field becomes much more stronger. The energy fields then starts, because of this intensity, there is a light radiation that, the parts of the brain and, the head starts emanating, and you see a sense of aura, which is actually intensive energy radiation, because for ordinary people, that energy is used up in our thoughts and all those things. For great Mahans and great saints, where the mind becomes very quiet, the energy is concentrated, and you see that the energy emanates heat, and the heat, shows up as, an aura. That's why, great saints and sages have that, kind of an aura around them. So we see that this formless form of I is the fire or light that great saints and sages have. This is principle 4. And actually, even for yourself, if you are meditating intensively and you see that your mind attains the state of quietude, you see your body temperature starts going up, and you can actually feel the energy feels much more stronger, because an unused energy percolates in your body systems, in your all your neural pathways, and you see that it becomes more concentrated, and you'll see that the body temperature goes up. So basically what we see is that light, the energy or light, is actually the source of our universe. And we see that Big Bang is the tensed energy in a very, very small point. It's so dense, that energy, that it exploded into this Big Bang, and part of the radiation which is released, that energy that is released, is in this universe, where we see that in the universe, everything reverberates with this vibration. So an example of this is essentially when you have this old TV, not the current satellite TV, but you have an old TV with an aerial antenna up your roof. When you switch on, you get that kind of sound, shh, that sound, right? The kind of static sound. That static sound is actually the remnants of the electromagnetic field from the Big Bang, right? And I think in 1978, 2 scientists discovered this radiation from the Big Bang and won the Nobel Prize for this. So what we see here is that from this the substratum, we see that the primordial atom emerged. And I think I've given an earlier discussion of how this came about. In that primordial, atom, we see that, the entire DNA of our universe was embedded, which is the four-dimensional universe, three-dimensional space and time. And because time was embedded, we see that, there is a motion, there is a kind of a, movement, there's dynamism built into our universe, which gave rise to the birth of our universe with that intensive heat. Energy is actually movement. So there's, movement and time, and it was in a very intensive point that it, exploded into this Big Bang. And everything from electromagnetism, all the energies were released. And we see that the Big Bang took place somewhere about 13.82 billion years ago. That 13.82 billion years of evolution is where we stand at the present moment, with everything in the Big Bang, every element that is created in this universe is part and parcel of us. So we see that the air that we breathe, the oxygen, the nitrogen, the iron, all that in our body were the crucibles of the Big Bang. So a part of the Big Bang is in us. A part of the light is in us. As how the Big Bang commenced with this primordial atom, there are millions and billions of suns that were created from that primordial atom. And that from that, we have millions and billions of Big Bangs that emerged, all the quasars and all those, different suns that emerge, the lights that we see as sun. A part of that sun is also our sun. And from there emerged the core of many suns. And we see that our Earth has got a core that is very, very hot with light radiation. And we see that as how that is imprinted in the universe, into all the galaxies, into the planets, into every human and every biological cells, in every entity, light is present in the form of electrons and protons and quarks. So you can say that the universe is part of us and we are part of the universe. So this is what Swamiji is saying. So he says that, as thought is all pervading, diffusion of I, he says that the energy or the pulsation of I is sound, as I mentioned earlier. And the formless form of I is what he calls fire or light. He says everything originates from this light. It is called the great causal sphere. It's like the Big Bang is like a sphere that explodes and it releases multiple Big Bangs, micro level Big Bangs, cellular level Big Bangs, and so on. So even our thoughts, if you look at our thoughts, it's quiet, and then a small pin of a thought appears, and then you see that it just expands and dissolves, right? And then another one emerges. So part of the DNA of that universe is imprinted in all of us. So we are all universal in some sense. So we are all solar beings, energy beings, or quantum beings, whatever term that we use. We all are that oneness. We have this oneness. So Swamiji here explains this concept of how this fire, he says fire, the scintillation becomes spark. So he's describing now the Big Bang, right? Which ultimately breaks up into atoms, right? And he says that these atoms cohere, that means come together and form all kinds of objects. So we have the quarks, the electrons, and all those things come and form molecules, hydrogen, helium, hydrogen, oxygen, and all these things. And then these are basic building blocks of the universe. And ultimately, they come together to form complex building blocks, including life itself. So he says that these atoms cohere and form all kinds of objects and worlds, of this universe, in this universe. This is objects of like feathers, And unlike feathers, he's now describing, they all come together, clump together. They look very similar. And there are times where they look different. So the clusters of nebulas and clusters of cells that forms, that have different functions, different DNA. So he's describing science in his own words. So again, he says that, and unlike feathers are caused by, according to the magnitude of speed and the intensity of heat in them. So he says that the clusters and the nebulas form because of the speed and also the intensity. Right? So he says, so we have all this differentiation because of these various conditions that is embedded in our nature, in our universe. So he gives an example that he says that our body also is fire, right? So sometimes we call it Kundalini Fire. Kunda means the vessel, this body. Lini is actually the fire or the energy source or the life source or life force. He says that the blood that, courses through it and the semen that secretes in it are also fire. So everything from our body to the life-giving nectar, everything is fire. He says, likewise, the trees, their seeds, sky, clouds, water, land, and air, fire. You see, and he says the warmth, heat, ether, vapor, light, luster of fire are its, several names. We call it different names, according to its specific action. So we call it differently, wind and, vapor and ether. Ultimately, at the core, it is fire itself. He says because it's got electrons, protons, and all the other building blocks. He says all the worlds, planets, stars revolve around the fire, and in a clockwise direction. So there is a kind of a direction, a spin force that essentially, enables the various changes in the dynamism. So he speaks about this entire cosmos as a kind of a causal sphere of fire that continuously, imprints its DNA in every facet of its existence. So again, he goes on to say the burning red sun, speaks about the sun, and its bright light became fire, water, soil, cohered and settled as world, cohered, came together and settled as worlds and became seeds, plants, finally as semen that gives rise to complex human beings and biological beings. So he says that, so remember that semen or embryo, that means the building blocks of our life, is nothing but the same original light. He says, life is light, and light is life. You see, so he speaks about this. He says, everything that we walk and run and dance and sing, we learn, all the arts and crafts, we humble ourselves and beg and serve. All these are everything that we do in this universe is because of this light. You see, he says that we can do all this because everything in this universe needs light. Like how the plants need photosynthesis to make energy, the same way the human body and all biological beings would need to absorb the light of other entities like plants and food, and they are all in the form of light that transforms into our body, which is also light. So we are nothing but light standing on light, light standing in light, and light within the light. So he speaks about this. This is where we see that this whole notion of enlightenment comes when the human mind connects to this light. It becomes aware of itself. So this notion of enlightenment is about that oneness, the connectedness to the supreme light. So this is what Swamiji speaks about. And in this, you see that when we meditate, when the mind becomes very quiet, we see that the light radiation that is constant throughout our life journey, constant throughout our day, becomes more magnified when our mind is less caught up in this material world or caught up in frivolous things, when the mind is more concentrated, it is able to experience its light force. And in that light force, the mind, which is very quiet, is able to become more calmer, more cooler, and becomes more aware of itself. A sense of clarity comes, a sense of understanding comes, a sense of enlightenment takes place. And this is what Swamiji is talking about. This whole notion of our entire universe, our entire cosmos is underpinned by energy or vibration, which gives rise to light, which emanates in everything in this universe. So we are all, you can say, light. We are all enlightened beings. Enlightened, that means we have been lit by this, we are this. And so it's not, that is why sometimes in many scriptures say that we are Jivan Mukti. Jivan Mukti is the soul that is enlightened. But because we get caught up with these material things, we forget our true self. So we get caught up in this, what we call the world that is changing, right? The changing world, we get caught up with the change, not realizing that the change is taking place on a changeless substratum. So meditation, introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation enables us to understand the change and that which supports the change, which is the changeless substratum. That is ultimately, that I that emanates as light and sound and all those things. So in that meditation, know that you are that light, you are the source of that enlightenment, and you are the source of an enlightened life. Everything, the epicenter of that enlightenment starts and ends with you. Santosha.